we need to provide food and fibre to the world. We need to feed the world, and we need to provide fibre so that we can provide the clothing, the buildings, the energy that the globe needs as it goes towards 2050. I find often, having been in the space of policy for over a decade, the biggest mistake that policymakers make is ignoring the best innovators that we have. The best innovators we have are farmers. We need to harness and utilise the innovation skills of farmers. They're used to doing a lot with not much and working out ways of doing things cleverly. So we shouldn't be dictating to farmers about how they do things. We should be creating policy in a way that enables them to come up with innovative solutions. So how do we do this well? Well, today we have our guest panel here to talk us through this. We've got David Jahinki, the President of the National Farmers Federation. We've got Eric Mittenthal, he's the Chief Strategy Officer of the Meat Institute. Joel Froment, he's the President of the International Dairy Federation. And over to you, Keith. You're starting us off. And Keith Curry is the President of the Canadian Federation of Agriculture, and he's also a World Farmers Organisation board member. He has an eighth generation family farm on the shores of the Georgian Bay, and he operates a farm with cash crops, forage production, sweet corn and gladioli. So over to you, Keith.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And yeah, we got into the gladiola flowers because I realized there was a lot of guilty men in the world, and they always have to go buy flowers for their significant others. So it's been a good business. But thanks for that introduction. And something you just said about farmers hating to be dictated to. You're absolutely right. And more specifically, especially around the sustainability initiatives that farmers right around the world are doing. I think we're frustrated that we're not recognized for all the good that we're doing, and look to our respective regulators about being dictated to instead of looking at us as taking advantage of us for all that we're doing. It doesn't matter where you go in the world, depending on your climate, depending on your soil type, depending on the type of farming operation you have. All farmers are deeply invested in sustainability initiatives. I know in Canada, we have I was just talking with a number of people this morning about a sustainable ag strategy that we launched, or are about to launch soon, but we've been in the development of it for the last 3 years with our entire value chain in the industry and as well as government. And it's a long-term vision for sustainability initiatives in the agricultural world in Canada across all sectors. We just recently created a national index for agri-food performance, which not only includes the entire value chain from food to fork, but we also have many ENGOs. We have government involved, folks like World Wildlife Canada are there. So it's really an index that's going to be a data platform and a place for people to go to see what's happening within the agri-food industry as a whole, which we feel is going to be really important, certainly on the trade side of things, as we start to, as Canada continues to be a world trader. We can't consume nearly what we produce. We're a major exporter of food products, the 7th largest in the world. So making sure we having that platform that will highlight all of our production values, including sustainability initiatives, is important. Our government recently launched a 2 billion tree initiative, which they are looking for Canadians to plant 2 billion trees that are going to certainly contribute to the mitigation aspect of carbon emissions. Farmers have always been involved with tree management. Excuse me. Certainly with respect to the uptake of the 2 billion tree, it's not 2 billion tree plantings. It's not something farmers are jumping into with both feet, mostly because in a lot of cases there's an expectation that we do it without any kind of financial reward or financial expectation of society, but more the financial burden on the producer to do these kinds of things. When in actual reality, we do manage things on our farm in different ways, including trees and woodlots. Many of our beef farmers, who not only are doing a great job of sequestering carbon through their grasslands and prairie lands, they're also using woodlots as housing for cattle, and they're managing the woodlot that way. So there's lots of aspects out there that we're doing. I'm sure others are going to talk about it, but our dairy industry is also launched a campaign to be net zero by 2050. So all the sectors, like many countries, are working on sustainable initiatives. What we're looking for is not to be penalized or demonized for what we're doing, but how about you look at us as an asset in the sustainability conversation? And that's certainly the conversations that we're trying to have with our government, as well as our trading partners. I think that's important. I've also talked a lot in the last few days about around the corner, we're going to see border carbon adjustments come into play, and how's that going to affect agriculture products around the world, and is there a level playing field? So, you know, we're doing the best that we can to make sure that we're being sustainable, and we want to make sure that our governments and our policymakers and our trading partners are recognizing that as well. So lots on the go, Sarah, lots on the go.
Oh, there we go. Thanks, Keith. I'll come to David Jahinke or DJ next, but I just wanted to follow up on your point there, Keith. Do you have an example of perhaps a policy out of Canada that has worked really well for farmers, or has had a significant uptake in the climate space or any other space that you can think of, which was designed in such a way that really did speak to farmers, and you've seen that high uptake?
There hasn't been anything specific that's had really a massive uptake, other than, as I said, the sustainable ag strategy that we have been, that was in development, is about to be launched. There's no official date yet on the launch, but within that strategy are a lot of things that we can grab a hold of, especially on investments on technologies, whether that's hardware to help us farm smarter with less resources, whether that's crop technologies, seed technologies, livestock genetics, crop protection product technologies, those kinds of things. There's going to be a lot of opportunities within that strategy as we go forward. I can tell you about a negative one, though, however.
Happy to hear negatives as well.
And, you know, our government, the current government that came into place 10 years ago, has had a real strong climate change mandate. And that's not the bad part. The bad part is they've imposed a carbon tax with the intent of trying to change behavior. So in concept, that's not a bad thing. What they failed to do is really talk to farmers about the aspect of a carbon tax, because the reality is it's hard to change habits when there's no alternatives. We in rural Canada, like many rural parts of the world, we don't have access to things that that to get us away from fossil fuels. We dry our grains with natural gas. Electric cars and vehicles don't work well. We don't have electric vehicles on farm. We don't have three-phase power in a lot of places in across Canada. So we're relying on fossil fuels without the opportunity to choose something else. And it's really impacted farmers because we're price takers, not price setters. We don't get that extra charge back out of the consuming public. We have to absorb it. So it's been a highly contested, hot issue that really has got farmers upset without any ability of the government to recognize that or adjust it. So it works both ways. Yeah,
we were in a session actually yesterday. We were talking about that issue in forestry and sustainable forest management, where there's a certification process where they work with the growers in an iterative process. If somebody's not complying with the sustainability requirements, not usually because they don't want to, it's because they can't. And so working with the producer to try and work out how you do it seems to be a much better way of getting a better outcome, and actually the government achieving its outcome that it wants to achieve. Thank you so much, Keith. And over to you, DJ. DJ is the president of the National Farmers Federation in Australia, and he's a third-generation dryland mixed farmer, and he does broadland cropping and runs a finishing prime lamb operation. Over to you.
Thanks, Sarah. And also in the middle of harvest at the moment as well, so been keeping touch of how everything's been going at home. But as everyone's aware, Australia is a really big country. About 70% of our land mass is described as arid or semi-arid, which means we're quite dry. And on top of that, we roughly farm about 55% of that land mass, mainly to rangeland grazing, and that's the backbone of our cattle industry. And when you break that down a little bit further, that 55% of land mass that we do farm, it's really just the close to the coastline. It's not that centre part that we actually can grow crops on, where we have significant export opportunities. We export about 65-70% of what we produce. And for us, that's a value of roughly $80 billion. We'd like to see that up to $100 billion. That's one of the key targets that we've set as agriculture, along with government as well. And as a part of that, we also want to ensure that our sustainability credentials aren't lost in that high headline number. And for us, it's describing how we run agriculture, what we do in agriculture in Australia, in Australian language. So we have something called the Australian Sustainability Framework, which is one of the key aspects that we've brought to COP over the last 3 COPs to put forward our ESG. How can farmers on the ground ensure that we are walking the talk of both sustainability as well as ensuring that we've got some really key criteria that we're measuring ourselves against, both for our markets that we very much rely on, but also talking to government and putting programs into place to ensure that we're progressively becoming better. And Australian agriculture is absolutely underpinned by our research and development arm. And it is one of the backbones of all of our industries. There's about 13 different RDCs, research and development corporations, that are matched dollar for dollar from farmer input to ensure that we've got some really firm research behind whatever we do in agriculture. And out of that, we have some what we also call CRCs, which is collaborative research centres that also do research as well. And one of those that has been established is a net zero collaborative research centre, and which is really the backbone of where some of the push around how can we get to net zero. We're also chair of what we call the CANS group, and that's a trade liberalisation committee that's been going for roughly 40 years. And we put out a statement prior to this COP, and that is that we are prepared to participate in any movement to getting towards net zero in agriculture, so long as it doesn't impact on agricultural production. And that's a really key statement for us, and we keep reiterating that because we want to participate in this conversation as far as that we also understand that there's a balance between food production as well as that environmental standards, that carbon credentials that we are seeking to incorporate into our farming systems. So there's always this dance between what farmers do on their farms to ensure that they are productive, ensuring that we're meeting the objectives of the government of the day, and also keeping our ESG, our social respects to licence and our governance, and how we manage that triple bottom line of running profitable businesses in a sustainable way. But also understanding that the demand for food, as was mentioned, the fact that the demand on our resources are ever increasing, and we've got to become more efficient, be smarter in how we use technology, smarter how we can exercise the data that we do have to make better decisions, because we understand quite simply that the soil is our biggest asset. That's what we buy and sell when we purchase farms. The soil is the location. Then the next most important thing is our decision making, and that utilises the resources that we have. And if we can combine those two of the valuable soil that we have, that valuable resource of making good decisions with smarter science, and then measuring that on our outputs, that is the sweet spot that we're trying to achieve. And for us, that's one of the key parts of why we're here with the Australian delegation, to both support that sustainability framework and all the good work that government and industry's gone to develop up those matrices, and then also continually improve on it.
Fantastic, thanks DJ. And I think farmers are up for the challenge. 9.5 billion people by 2050. We have to feed them, and we have to clothe them, and we have to build homes for them. Reducing that production is just actually not an option. So we're really reliant on the farmers to deliver some solutions. Now, Australia has a carbon market, the ACCU scheme, and also an emerging biodiversity market. Do the National Farmers Federation have targets in relation to the use of the carbon market at all? You've got a target for exports at 100 billion. Is there targets in that space yet, or still an emerging discussion?
No, there's no targets in that. However, we are very keen, once again, from this COP to understand the 6.2, 6.4 trading, and also the ability to sell any of those carbon attributes. But what we are seeing in agriculture in general is that farmers want to understand what their carbon footprint is to start with, because that actually unlocks the ability, do they have any upside or potential? Because you come back to that first principle that we are here to produce food and fibre. That is our primary purpose. Now, if you can do that with a reduced footprint on the environment, that's the outcome, that's the sweet spot. But we are looking to utilise those carbon credentials, either insetting them or using them to get access to some of those Scope 3 inputs that we have, and we don't have a lot of control over where our nitrogen comes from. We are heavily reliant on imports and the use of fossil fuels to produce especially nitrogen, and those agrochemistry as well, that is very heavily energy rich. So if you look at it as a pure systems aspect, the carbon that we are saving basically has to be utilised for those inputs if we want to become a net zero position.
Yep, fantastic. Thanks, DJ. I'll flick to Eric next, but I just wanted to pick up on your point about Article 6.4, and I think that's been a really concerning development out of this COP, is the potential of this fantastic market in Article 6.4, in which companies will be able to trade with countries to contribute towards their NDCs. But I guess the way that it's been drafted at this point, there are concerns from the farming constituency and definitely from the Australian Forest Products Association about the way that it's been drafted may actually lock out nature-based solutions. That would be native vegetation plantings, other potential carbon markets, and forestry as well. So, yeah, thank you for mentioning that. So, next speaker, Eric Mithenthal. So, he's the Chief Strategy Officer at the Meat Institute. The Meat Institute is the peak meat processing association in the US, I believe.
Yes.
Yes, perfect. Wait. But I also want to introduce him as the most impressive title I've ever heard in my life. I'm sorry to embarrass you, but I've spoken to a number of people in the farmers' constituency and they agree, without even prompting. He is also the president of the National Hot Dog and Sausage Council in the US. And I got to say, people back in the Australian office at AFPA were very jealous that I got to meet Eric. So sorry to embarrass you. Over to you, Eric.
It's never embarrassing to talk about hot dogs.
Good.
I also go by the hot dog top dog, so we very much embrace our nicknames. I was hired by the Queen of Ween several years ago, so we are always happy to talk about hot dogs. And in case you haven't seen my socks, I wore those at Sarah's request. So my day job and the thing that I work on the most is at the Meat Institute. And our members are packers and processors across North America that represent 95% of the red meat that's produced in the U.S. and North America, beef, pork, lamb, veal, as well as bison, and then the majority of the poultry as well. We have about 330 members across North America, and the majority of those companies are small companies. We certainly work with the very largest companies that you're probably familiar with from North America, but we have a very diverse membership across all of those different proteins. Within our membership, we recognized several years ago, hearing the conversation about meat and sustainability, and oftentimes calls that meat cannot play a role in healthy, sustainable diets, and we felt like meat must play a role in healthy and sustainable diets because of the nutrition and food security and contribution to land and environment and livelihoods, both in North America and around the world. And so what we set out to do is create a collaborative framework across our membership as well as the rest of animal agriculture in North America to work together towards common goals and adopting practices throughout the U.S. And so for us, that means working with our members in the packer processor sector across 100 different metrics in 5 different focus areas. Certainly climate is a really important one, something that we've advanced on a lot over the last few years. But it's climate, it's animal welfare, it's food safety, it's nutrition and food security, as well as labor and human rights. And we've begun collecting data from our members now in our 3rd year, starting from a point of zero where we had no history of actively collecting data at an industry level from our membership, to now having about 90% of the industry by volume reporting data to us on an annual basis, demonstrating their progress across all of those metrics and focus areas over the last several years. When it comes to climate, we are working with our members to set targets and ideally achieve them looking ahead to 2030. We've begun creating resources over the last several years to help them measure emissions, and we created the first ever for North America meat industry specific greenhouse gas roadmap and calculator specific for meat companies to consider the various elements that meat companies factor into meat companies' scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions, doing that in partnership with the UN Global Compact. This past year, we've invested heavily into more widespread greenhouse gas education for companies, learning how to measure scope 1, 2, 3 emissions, setting science-based targets, adopting abatement strategies, and ultimately reporting into CDP and different projects as well. And so we've had really strong uptake from our members over the last year in that, and building it out into the next year. And then it expands beyond what we do within our organization. And so because we serve as an umbrella of all of the different animal proteins across North America, we're partnered really closely with producers on the ground through the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, which brings a whole supply chain approach to beef sustainability. The U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Poultry and Eggs, which again does very similar work in the poultry and egg space. The National Pork Board and their We Care program, which specifically funds on-the-ground emissions measurement and on-farm practices for pork farmers across the U.S. Partnering really closely with the dairy sector in the U.S. and the work that they're doing across the Innovation Center for U.S. Dairy and the farm program there, as well as the feed sector as well. And so trying to work very consistently and collaboratively across all of the different sectors to not only adopt the practices that we need to demonstrate improvements in those areas, but also do so in a data-driven way. So while we're collecting data from our members, we're also working with the producers in all of those different sectors to try to tie data systems together. Still a work in progress to get the data systems to flow from one end to another, but progress is being made where we're able to learn from each other, see where the opportunities are, invest in opportunities for improvement, and continue to demonstrate progress moving forward. So something that we're going to be continuing to work on through the rest of this decade, and investing more in research, as well as bringing in retail and restaurant partners as well, who are also very invested in this work, and making sure that they're engaged in this process so that the whole supply chain can be working together in a very collaborative manner.
Okay, thanks, Eric. I've got 2 questions for you as follow-up. What sort of data are you collecting from your members, and what sort of practical measures are your members looking at to reduce their emissions?
Yeah, so we are collecting mostly qualitative data from our members. And so what we're asking is, do you have programs in place that represent best practices across all of our different focus areas? One of our challenges from the very beginning is that because we have such a diverse membership representing different products, representing different sizes of companies, is that what one company is doing doesn't necessarily apply to what another company might be doing. It's very context specific. And so we want to make sure that companies are doing the things that make the most sense for their individual company, and bringing resources to the industry as a whole and letting companies determine what makes sense for them. And so we are engaged in a variety. I mentioned the greenhouse gas measurement programs. We create education based off of the data that we have to really target the industry and the needs that we have, and make sure that companies have those resources as a toolbox to ensure that they can apply the things within their companies that make sense.
Beautiful, thank you. So our next speaker is Gel Ferment, who will stand up here and present, because he's got a couple of slides. So he's from the International Dairy Federation. He's the president of that organisation, which represents dairy farmers internationally. He has almost 30 years of dairy advocacy, so I'm looking forward to hearing your presentation. Okay, thank you, Joe.
Thank you very much, and I have so we'll move from hot dog to dairy, and maybe burgers, maybe cheeseburgers. Very glad to be here today. Just thought I would maybe give you a couple of highlights about the dairy, the International Dairy Federation. So I became president a month ago. I have Laurent Damier here, who's sitting on our board, so I want to recognize, and the previous president, Pierre Cristiano, is with us as well. So the International Dairy Federation is not there to represent just farmers. Is there to represent the whole supply chain, but of course farmer is where it starts, and it's very important. We are a membership organization, so there's about 40 countries member. Australia is a very active participant, and Canada as well. In my day job, I work for a dairy processor in Canada called Lactalis, a small one, which is also in Australia. So I just thought I would give a few highlights about how we see this agenda. So at the farm level, I think it's very important to recognize that the dairy farm will vary quite a bit whether you're in different regions. So you can go from this is shaped by regional practices, resource available, and so on. And but the reality is that most dairy farms around the world are still family-run businesses. You have the example of, pasture-based system in New Zealand or Ireland, where most of the cows would graze normally on grass. Intensive farming, such as in the US or the Netherlands, high output, high efficiency. And then you also have quite a few small cooperative farmers, smallholder, that are very common in regions such as India and quite a bit of Africa. So you have those different farming, so not one model will fit all. In terms of the emission, I think it's very important to recognize that a lot of the emission in dairy is linked to production, and productivity. So the highest productivity, if you have healthy animal, I was on a panel on animal health yesterday. You will definitely help with the productivity, and we have data showing that efficiency gain can contribute to or will contribute to probably 40% or more of the total emission by 2050. And dairy production right now, I think, is very important to recognize. It's about 2% of the human cause emission and about 12% of the global methane. Here we have, I was talking about small farms and so on, but you have on the right there, the majority of dairy farmers are smallholders, and their livelihood very much depend on this activity on dairy farming. And you can see that in terms of number of farmers and number of animals, and when you go to production, it's quite different in terms of the percentage when you get to more than 10 cows represent. So there's quite a few farms that are much smaller than 10 cows around the world. This is a very important slide as well. This is part of a study that was done because I like to say that dairy is not really the problem, but it's part of the solution to methane and greenhouse gas emission. So it's been recognized, I think, that especially for cows on pasture, that when you look at the dairy, those dairy cows, they don't really create new emission. They just take emission from the soil, cycle them in methane, which is very potent actually, and not very good, but it's very short-lived, 10 or 12 years or 14 years, and then it's reconverted in CO2. So it ends up in the air, it ends up in the food, it ends up in the water. But very little additional emission is created by those animals. So when we talk about these type of farms, net zero may mean that we're not adding carbon to the atmosphere. rather than really the intent of there's still ways of reducing it, and there's ammonia and other concern, but that's very important to recognize. So when we look at sorry, I shifted ahead quite a bit. I don't know why. I lost my. Sorry. We're going to need to go back because I lost the. So I move ahead. It just goes. Yes, very good. Yeah. So when we look at the dairy production is is very important to reduce poverty, to improve food security, and we firmly believe that there's a variety of solutions that will help, mitigating the negative impact on the environment. And you look at the sustainability here, the equation between environmental, social, but also nutrition, which is very important in moving forward, and the nutrition density. IDF publish a lot of publication over time, and we talked about measurement earlier, so we also recognize that measuring where you are now and is the first step in trying to find ways of improving. So we developed some guide. IDF is a research and a science-based organization. So LCA, Life Cycle Analysis Guide for the dairy sector. There was a first version in 2015, a second version in 2022. And then there's a new publication coming on LCA verification that's going to just be released probably in the coming month. When we look at reducing emission, there's probably no silver bullet overall. There's no universal solution. So I think the effort that we need to look at are in many ways, looking at improving our efficiency, protecting the natural resources, and ensuring or enhancing the circularity throughout the system. So you have, for example, low productivity system, where you're going to be looking at improving animal health, feed quality, and husbandry practices to boost production and reduce emission intensity. But you also have the higher productivity system, where you're going to look at feed additive, you're going to look at the methane vaccine, you may look at waste management, and so on. And now there's also new technology and genetics improvement as well to look at, breeding for lower emission. So I don't need to go through all that, but I think it's a bit of repetition. The last slide I would talk about is we have embarked in a process of continuous improvement in the global dairy sector. And in 2016 at the World Dairy Summit in Rotterdam, the FAO and IDF signed the Dairy Declaration of Rotterdam, which was signed in 2016. And there's been a lot of action. We talk about global action, the global agenda, the dairy sustainability framework from 2013, the declaration I was talking, Pathway to Net Zero by the Global Dairy Platform and the Global Methane Pledge 2 years ago. And then just a month ago in Paris at the World Dairy Summit, that commitment was renewed by IDF and the FAO in what we call the Paris Declaration on Sustainability. So, we have now more than 40 members that have signed. We're going to have another signature this afternoon by by a major company. So we are looking, and then we're going to put more action towards that now in terms of action plan moving forward. How do we measure globally our impact, and how do we measure our improvement? So to 2030, which is tomorrow essentially, and then to 2050, which is the next generation. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Joe. I will ask you one question just about if you can dig in a little bit further about that animal health and how that helps reduce emissions. I'd love to hear that. But firstly, I just wanted to reflect on some of the comments you made about the need for nuance for different regions because dairy looks very different, and I'd say that probably works for most of agriculture. It looks very different around the world, and so there is this need for nuance. And also I was really taken by the slide of the percentage of your industry that has quite small holders, and that sort of reflects the need for very sensitive policy in this space if you've got a high proportion of global south people impacted by policy where nutrition, human nutrition and other things would come into play. But yes, the question about animal health and how can that reduce carbon emissions?
Yeah, so a few comments on smallholder, and I'll go to maybe a little more on that. So it's about 75% of dairy farms are smallholders. So and productivity tends to be lower. So you wanna, you're looking at 3, 4, 5, 6 liter per day, whereas in certain countries you're at 35 or 40 liters. So this is quite a difference. I'm not saying you can increase there overnight, but just a little change. Imagine, if you have India that would double their milk output per cow over the next 10 or 15 years, how much more production it would bring, the equivalent of two U.S. production or 2.5 U.S. production. So that's a huge one. When we look at animal health, and I think it's quite interesting that you have to think about as I said yesterday, a healthy animal is a productive animal. And that's what you have. And if you have a healthy animal, you have a productive animal. That means that you will have by de facto less emission coming from that production. So it starts from the breed, breed for healthy animal, the calf health with colostrum and so on, and the husbandry practices going on. Then you have, the whole management of the farm, making sure that you are improving, making sure that you avoid the use of antibiotic, or because an animal that is sick is usually wasted milk as well. So health is very important. The health of animal will certainly help, reducing the impact on the environment overall.
Beautiful. We will take questions from the audience. Perhaps while you're thinking of questions to ask, make Ross Hampton give the microphone to anyone who has a question. I just wanted to reflect on what actually I think everybody has said today about the need for measurement first. And I'd say from the Australian Forest Products Association, that's something that we're at that stage, the measuring first. We've done Scope 1 emissions, and we actually sequester more than we emit across the growing, the sawmills and the pulp and paper manufacturers. That was a bit of a surprise to us. And for those of you who are not obsessed about wood, we're quite fortunate in the timber industry because half of the weight of timber is stored carbon. So when it grows, when the tree grows, sucks in carbon, and when we harvest the tree, that carbon is then stored in the timber, which then goes into the built environment and creates another forest, as we're saying, in the built environment. Then we replant, of course, and the cycle continues. But it doesn't mean we haven't got areas we have got to work on. We're fortunate in that we're able to use biomass. We have a lot of heating needs in the sector in drying our timber and our paper. So trying to reduce emissions in those areas, also moving to electric vehicles in our stands and coops will be really important going forward. So in every way that we can, we're going to be trying to reduce those emissions. Questions from the audience? Tony Ma, CEO of the National Farmers Federation in Australia.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, panel. I have a question for the hot dog, top dog, but I'd be interested in the rest of the panel's answers as well. How much is the driver for this coming from the consumer? How much is coming from up the supply chain? How much is coming from government? So if you could split it 30-30-30, is that what it is? What is the driver? And I'd be interested in the farmers' representatives' response as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think right now it's not 30-30-30. I think the consumer, particularly in the U.S. right now, is not paying for sustainability at the moment, and so I would say that's on the lower end from the consumers. It's not coming as much from our government right now. There's not as much as government mandate. We are working closely with our government in terms of finding opportunities to drive improvements. We've really taken a very market-based approach and incentive-based approach within our country. I will say that a lot is coming from our customers in retail and food service, investors, outside stakeholders in terms of driving this. Our goal in the end is increasing consumer trust. And even if consumers aren't paying for sustainability right now, we anticipate that consumers are looking for it, and we want to align what we're doing to consumer expectations. And so that's our metric within the organization of how are we measuring success? It's are we making sure that we're meeting what consumer expectations are for the industry?
Keith?
Great question, Tony, and I'll disagree slightly with Eric from the aspect of the consumer. He's not wrong about this consumer necessarily driving it, but there's now become an expectation that we are. So indirectly, they probably are driving that more so than we probably realize. The reality of it is farmers have to be sustainable. We don't have a choice. We talk at conferences like this about emissions, and it's all about emissions, but the reality is everything starts under our feet. It all starts with healthy soils. It doesn't matter what kind of producer you are, unless you're into seafood. It starts with the soil, and for the farmer, we can't survive without looking after our soil because it looks after us. And so I think, we inherently are always conscious of our environmental surroundings and continue to produce, regardless of all the noise coming from government, consumer, and advocacy groups, because we have to survive. And, everybody focuses on climate change around the environmental aspects, which are very important. DJ, you touched on the social aspect of things, and I think that's very important, especially from a food security standpoint. But there's nothing more vital to a farmer than economic sustainability. And that gets lost in conversations at places like this. And the reality is, I'm not going to farm if I'm going broke. And I've used this before at this conference. It's hard to farm green when you're farming in the red. So, we need to make sure that we have a balance of all those things. And yes, there's that inherent expectation from consumers that we are farming sustainably and practically and right. There's that demand now from our international companies that are buying our products because they want to make sure that they can brag about a carbon footprint that is very good. So then there's pressure back onto the farmer to make sure that we're doing those things. But at the end of the day, I'm doing it for me as much as anybody else. And yes, we might have to tailor what we do depending what the demand from the buyer or the consumer is, but we're still doing it on our own because it's in our own best interest. And that's the story that's not getting told, and that's that's where our governments are failing to recognize what we're doing as farmers and ranchers across this country.
Thanks, Keith. DJ, same question.
I'm a capitalist, Tony. So I actually farm to make money, surprisingly. Therefore, the social attributes are an add-on to our business, not the primary concern. It's actually every day when I get out of bed, I'm here to pay the overdraft. So as a part of that, and this is the very fortunate part about this conversation, leading on from what Keith had started, good farming practices are actually sustainable practices, because it's not my farm, it's my daughter's farm, actually. So if I'm not doing that, I'm not actually paying the bill for her as well. So in agriculture, especially in Australia, the farming entities have actually produced a lot of the farming systems and adopted the farming systems like the previous panel that we heard before around no-till. It was the farmers that sucked it and saw it to make it work. They're the ones who tinkered in the workshops to try to come up with the machinery to make trash management possible. We're the ones that put our money where our mouth was to purchase the equipment. So in my eyes, farmers are front and centre in all of this. Government has set some boundaries for us because they want to make sure that we're achieving the targets. But in a lot of circumstances, when you pop the hood, if it's dairy or horticulture or broadacre, we're doing a lot of really good things. It's just trying to express that to consumer so that they've got confidence that we are the trusted source of the fact that, once again, in our context, 55% of the land mass is being looked after. Now, the other 5% we can probably argue might be behind where agriculture is, possibly because of the investment that doesn't go into natural land management, because the weight does always come back to farming. And then secondly, when we look at the longer term set-asides or the actual process of utilising that land mass, there has been very little advancement in adopting some of the traditional techniques as land stewards. We're only starting to have this conversation now over the last decade, so I think that's a real indictment on where we could and possibly should be. But once again, I start with the fact that I'm a capitalist, I'm a farmer, so it's just fortunate that good farming practices are actually sustainable.
And finally to you, Joe.
Yeah, I think on the question on the percentage, I wouldn't be able to give you an exact answer either. But I think what is very clear, and I agree with a lot of what was said, there is some consumer expectations there, and in the end, the consumer buys our product. So they need to understand what we do, whether we're a farmer, whether we're a processor. They want to understand what's in the product, how it was made, how it was farmed, how it was manufactured, and so on. So we need to be able to explain that maybe better to the consumer. I'll give you an example. I work for a dairy processor in Canada. The demands that we have, and I'll make the same point, it really comes from the large retailers, our customers that are buying our dairy. They want to know, what's in the product, how it's made, even to the point that, that block of cheese, give me the exact footprint of that block of cheese, which is very hard. I know in my plant how much plastic I use, how much energy to the dot I use, but when you go to the farm and you turn to the farmer and you say, I want to know exactly, what, so we get back to measurement and continuous improvement there and trying, and we're not there. We may get there at some point, but there's still a lot of work to be done.
Thanks, Joe. Reflecting on what you've all said, I'd say in the forestry industry there is an expectation that we act sustainably. There are two large, independent, international sustainability verification certifications. There hasn't been a price premium that's come with that. That has been an expectation. So a quick yes/no answer from all of you about whether or not you foresee a price premium for a low carbon product in the future, starting with you, Keith.
I sure hope so. I think that's part of the economic sustainability going forward, as DJ said, for our children. And you're right, we're borrowing from our kids as we're doing this, but we're also still trying to keep our own heads above the water. the issue is going to be is where does that price premium come from? Is the consumer actually going to absorb it? A lot of pressure around the world on food prices right now. And you know who's going to pay the price at the end of the day because it gets shoved down the line through the retailers, to Gilles, to who? You and I, DJ. And, you know, we can't extract that money from the consumer unless we're selling direct, but 99% of us don't sell direct to the consumer. So how do we get that price premium? How do we get the consumer to understand that what they're paying for is also the future? It's also food security for the future, because, you know, as I said, I'm looking out for myself and making sure that my land's sustainable, but, you know, so is Gilles in his business. He doesn't care about me as much as he cares about his company's carbon footprint, and that's not meant to be a criticism, that's just a fact. So as much as I hope there's a price premium for that, I've been around long enough to know that I'm not holding my breath that it's going to come.
DJ?
Yeah, gonna need some shared language then, but I'll refine it. No, we won't. No. Look, the reality is, we have to do more with less continually. We are a high-cost production system purely because of our high value, and this is the thing that always gets me. We talk about the price of food. We don't talk about the value of food. Because when you buy that article, if it's a block of cheese, you're buying the environmental standards, you're buying the HR standards that we have that everybody gets employed under, the fact that we have high workplace safety standards that we adhere to. This is what you buy in value, not the price of the actual product, because the price of the product does not represent what you actually pay for. So describe what the value is, and now we are being asked for carbon, and beyond that, I think that nature positive, the fact that the bio sphere of what we actually are protecting as the land stewards of a large percentage of the footprint of the nation is probably the fact that that's going to be more so the opportunity for us as a future income source potentially to be acknowledged for that good, because it is very linked to carbon. It's very much the same sink. The reality is, and I'm agreeing with you here, Keith, not saying that you're my dad, but I feel like we're in the same brotherhood here, because I can't see consumers going to the supermarket and buying their range-free eggs and their carbon-free footprint eggs at a 50% premium over a cost of living crisis that is global. And so the reality is, we can say a lot of things in this room, and it's really great that we're talking about some pretty wicked concepts, but the reality is, I think the great poet Eddie Maguire said, show me the money.
So I would echo a lot of what both gentlemen said. I think in the short term, those who go farther, faster may have the opportunity to have a price premium. I think over the longer term, our goal certainly is to bring the whole industry along in a consistent way, so that when consumers are getting products, they're getting products that they are very confident have the least impact possible, and they don't have... All right, switch over here. Don't necessarily have to pay more in the long term, and making sure farmers can get paid for it in a way that they bring value to their business as well. And so I don't think anybody has that answer for sure yet, but that's the ideal in the long term, is so that we have products that have the least impact as possible that everybody has access to.
Final comment, Joe?
Yeah, I think it's a tough question, but in the end, the consumer will have to pay. To me, there's no question. It will have to come from the consumer. The willingness to pay from consumer will vary. It depends on the premium, depends on the product probably. But I think in the end, you have no choice. I mean, you need viable businesses throughout the supply chain, and in the end, but there's been there's evidence that what the consumer's expectation is and what they're willing to pay is two different things, from my experience. And we've seen that in certain markets.
So we'll go to final comments. We've got 5 more minutes left in our session, so quickly coming up to the close of our session. And I'm keen for the panellists' thoughts on, if you had 2 minutes with the COP president to change something in this climate change space, as we're at the climate change COP, what would you change? What would you ask for the change to be?
Put us at the table. It all starts with a conversation. You can't understand what's going on or make it better if you aren't talking to the people like DJ and I that are on the ground to have to practically implement the ideological world that you're creating because you don't talk to us. Bring us to the table.
Thanks, Keith. DJ?
And after you've brought us to the table, understand what we can actually do, because the reality is you talk about soil carbon, that's completely tied to rainfall. If I'm in a low rainfall environment, I don't have that capacity. So what other levers do I pull? Help me build some tools.
Eric?
I would say it's a very holistic conversation. It needs to be a very holistic conversation. Climate is a very key piece of it. Food security is also critically important. And so we want to make sure that the steps that we're taking are supporting food security for people around the world, as well as climate, and making sure that all of those elements are taken into consideration.
Yeah, I think also yes. Let's have a chance to be at the table, and of course, with my hat, my dairy hat, I would say make sure that there's a better understanding that dairy is part of the solution, is not the problem, and that nutrition. I mean, when you look at sustainability, it's not only about climate, and a lot of people forget about that. You know, there's the economic aspect, there's the environmental aspect, and you know, the social aspect is very important, but the nutrition is very important. And we're talking about nourishing the world, and that's what we're doing as farmers, as food processors.
I just want to thank each of my panellists today. I really appreciate your input, and it's been a really interesting conversation. And I think taking away, what I've taken away is really, for the policymakers that are listening today in the room and online, you've got to engage with the farmers and the agriculture sector generally. Ag is a part of the solution, and they're up for the discussion. So let's achieve some great things together. Thank you.